Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metropolis Radio. Today we are talking about console exclusives. Recently, RGT85 made a video addressing some people that were telling him that console exclusives were anti-consumer. While his video did briefly explore what Microsoft has been doing, it had all the depth of a puddle. He never took into account that exclusives might not always be a good thing. Yes, sometimes they are necessary evils to sell consoles, but let's actually explore the topic of are console exclusives anti-consumer beyond just saying that consumers are entitled for wanting everything on one console.
You can make a case for the whole situation about buying up these other companies and potentially making a monopoly, and I would listen to that. I would listen to that, but it seems like people don't want to advance beyond that. They don't want to advance beyond that in this conversation. The crux of the conversation is, I have such and such platform, and it's BS that this game is not coming out on this platform because somebody else owns it. How does that not sound like the most entitled whiny baby thing in the world? Like, I want this, I want it now, I don't want to have to buy something else. Let's just never advance. Let's never advance in video games. And everything should be able to run on an NES. I still own an NES. Why isn't such and such game on there? Why isn't this company making a game for this? Do you get it?
Why would Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo compete on hardware when they can just buy up exclusivity deals, so you have to buy their consoles to play those games because they aren't going anywhere else? Anyways, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's get right into this response video, as I'm calling it.
From my heart and from my hand, why don't people understand my intention?
Rather than try to explain his primary arguments, I am just going to show them in this section.
When you go back to, when console exclusives started happening, you have to remember with the NES, okay, on the NES side of things, Nintendo had strict laws with companies that wouldn't allow them to make Sega Master System games. Okay, if you made third-party games, you could only make it on Nintendo platforms in the United States. So because of this, you had arguably the most anti-consumer thing, because you only had one system to play. You only had one version of a game on one system, and there wasn't any sort of competition. Now, of course, in Europe, this was not the case. And when you look at the Sega Master System library of games compared to Europe and the United States, it's a night and day difference. There's so many awesome games that were stuck in Europe because of Nintendo's anti-consumer mindset of only allowing companies to make on one platform. Of course. And back then, we never said things like, oh man, I really wish I could have this particular game on my platform. Why is it only on the other platform? Why don't things work in the way I want to work? We never really said that. We just accepted it. We understood how things work in life, and this new mindset, this new mentality of people where everything should be kumbaya. You shouldn't have to work for anything in life. Everything should just be handed to you, and everything should be available to you and only you, and everyone around you. It's beyond me. Oh, well, who can afford all this stuff? Life's not fair, blah, blah, blah. You know what I did? Okay, when Metal Gear Solid 4 came out on the PlayStation 3, I had an Xbox 360 that I had saved up money to buy, and I was in my early 20s, and Metal Gear Solid 4 came out for the PlayStation 3, and I said to myself at that point in time, I need to buy that bundle that they're releasing, but I can't afford it. So you know what I did? I walked into Best Buy, they gave me a credit card, and I built up my credit score buying it. I didn't say, holy shit, this is so anti-consumer. I can't believe Konami is putting this game that's a third-party game only on the PlayStation 3. I want it on my Xbox 360. I can't believe... No, it's business. You could make a case about Microsoft buying up all these studios, and that's sort of the crux of the conversation, because everyone is saying that if Microsoft starts doing these games, and even Sony themselves, a game like Call of Duty, we can't compete with Call of Duty if it were to go as a console exclusive game. You can't compete. You can't compete. I'm sorry. I thought the whole point of the video game industry was competition. I thought the whole point of the video game industry was to strive to do better. And if someone is doing something better than you, you try to find a way to circumvent that. You try to find a way to combat that, because competition makes for a better product. It makes for a better industry, a healthier industry, because now you have to come up with ideas. You have to think outside of the box. Not everything is just being handed to you from these third-party developers. It seems like the whole conversation doesn't really revolve around first party exclusives though, because that was something that a lot of people in the comments section of that video said, because I just basically said, you know, you want to play a first party Sony game, you buy a PlayStation. Maybe a couple years you can play it on PC, but you buy a PlayStation. You want to play a Gears of War or Halo, you buy an Xbox. You want to play Mario or Zelda, you buy a Nintendo product. But people said, no, it's not about that. It's about the third party exclusives. Okay. How does that sound bad? How does that sound bad to anyone? How are console exclusives a bad thing? Console exclusives make you buy a platform. And, you know, you might not like having to buy a Nintendo Switch to play a Super Mario Odyssey, but if that wasn't the case, if Nintendo was just a game developer and everyone was a game developer, what would be the point of having different systems? What would be the point of having anything like that? If you only have one console manufacturer and everyone's putting putting their games on one specific platform, do you realize how that would stifle creativity? Do you realize how that would stifle the entire video game industry? You would have dozens and dozens of games coming out a month and nothing would be able to survive. Nothing would be able to survive. Nothing at all. Because all these games will be fighting each other. All these games, that's too much competition. Okay, that's way too much competition. The average consumer only buys like what, 4 or 5 games a year, and then you're gonna have dozens and dozens of games coming out from top studios. Goodbye indie studios, because no one's gonna be playing your shit. No one's gonna be paying attention to it because there's not going to be a reason to, because you have all these bigger AAA games that are all coming out at once.
The first point that he brings up is Nintendo's draconian policies when it came to third-party developers. I am not endorsing Nintendo's practices here, but it is safe to say that the gaming industry back in the days of the NES and Super Nintendo were vastly different than what they are now. I mean, let's be fair, the video game market in the US went through a fucking crash in '83 and was only brought back because of Nintendo. So yeah, Nintendo could get away with it. But Microsoft, Sony, and even Nintendo themselves wouldn't be able to get away with something like that today because of the different manufacturers, along with the PC market exploding in the late 2000s. But RGT conflates a lot of different things, along with creating some false dichotomies, so let's go through those. But first, I feel that it's important to discern the difference between first, second, and third-party exclusivity. This is the type of exclusivity that virtually everyone doesn't take issue with. There might be a few, there's always a few exceptions to every rule. First-party exclusivity is a game that is developed and published by the console manufacturer. Think Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Kirby, F-Zero, and Splatoon are all exclusive to Nintendo's consoles. That is because Nintendo not only publishes the games, but develops them as well, as I have said. Other examples include Sonic the Hedgehog, Afterburner, Golden Axe, Gran Turismo, God of War, etc., etc. Many people, myself included, believe that first-party exclusives are a necessary evil in the gaming industry. If I could play the newest Legend of Zelda game on the Xbox Series X, then there wouldn't be a reason to buy a Nintendo console. But on the flip side, and this is important to note, people have made the argument that if first-party exclusives were so important to the industry, then why is Sega no longer manufacturing consoles? Why is Sega now a game developer when they were taking on Nintendo during the 16-bit era? Hell, who remembers this classic commercial?
Genesis does
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does
16-bit sports action.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does.
Get Joe Montana free, Pat Riley free, Buster Douglas free, Super Monaco GP free, or Columns free.
Genesis does.
What Nintendo don't.
Buy a 16-bit Genesis system between now and October 31st and get an extra game.
So, first-party exclusive can be a necessary evil, but if you pull a Sega and make a bunch of stupid decisions with your console launches, like launch the 32X and then the Saturn not even a year later, even though you promised that the 32X was going to be the next generation of Sega, then discontinued the Saturn 3 years after launch because it went over like a fart in fucking church, then launched the Dreamcast, and that pretty much died out in 2001. Yeah, I wonder why Sega is now just a game developer. Yeah, I tangented, but the point is, first-party exclusives are absolutely the necessary evil, and most people can probably agree with that. And in terms of Sega, It wasn't that their first-party games did poorly. It was just Sega was being Sega and made a bunch of stupid fucking decisions, if we're being fair. Before I go down the road of talking about second-party exclusives, I'm going to play another clip from RGT85's video where he conflates second-party exclusivity with third-party exclusivity.
Let's talk about how third parties work, because I'm someone who's spoken with a ton of third parties throughout the years, especially back in my journalism days when I was doing Nintendo Enthusiast, because there were a lot of things, you would see. Here's a company that comes to mind, Renegade Kid, who was Jules Watchum's company. And there was another guy there who I believe passed away, RIP, his name escapes me right now. But Renegade Kid used to do games for the DS and like the 3DS, but we'll talk mostly about the DS side of things. And you would have the Dementium games, which were awesome, Moon, which was awesome, but then they would also do these sort of contract games. I believe they did a Razor Scooter game, and I thought to myself, well, why would they do that? What's the point of doing something like that when you're making your own games and you're pretty much master of your own domain? But it's about business. Companies such as third-party companies will do things on their own time and make games that are available on everything. But then they also do contract work, where a company that makes more money than them comes along and says, hey, we want such and such game on here. We want this sort of game on here. Can you do it for us? Can we hire you to create a game for our system that's not a multi-platform game? And then the company will either say yes or no, depending on the money, depending on the situation, depending on what they're doing, and then accept it. And then you have a game that maybe releases on only one platform, and maybe if that game is successful down the road, if there's not so any sort of exclusivity with the console, the other companies come along and say, hey, we want this game too. How does that sound bad?
Here's why I'm bringing up second-party exclusivity. This comes in the form of a company with more money hiring a smaller developer to make a game for them. So he is right about that, but again, this is second-party exclusivity, not third-party. Think the Star Wars Rogue Squadron games on the GameCube. That was Rogue Squadron 2 and Rogue Squadron 3. They were released exclusively for the GameCube, yet Nintendo did not own LucasArts or Factor 5. Not even LucasArts owned Factor 5. Yet Factor 5 was contracted by LucasArts to make some Star Wars games, and some of those games ended up being exclusive to the GameCube, Rogue Squadron 2 and Rogue Squadron 3. And even the Nintendo 64, Star Wars Episode 1, Battle for Naboo immediately comes to mind as a Nintendo 64 exclusive. I would have brought up Star Wars Rogue Squadron, but that did also release for PC. And there were still other Star Wars games being released to the original Xbox, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, so on and so forth. All Star Wars games were not exclusive to Nintendo, only some of them were. Other examples of second-party exclusivity are Devil May Cry. It released for the PS2 initially, and then the Xbox 360 and PS3 came out. That's when the Devil May Cry HD collection came out, and that's when it was ported over to Xbox 360. Ratchet & Clank was a second-party exclusive because Insomniac was not owned by Sony when the games were first being published, and I believe Sony did not acquire Insomniac until 2018. Sunset Overdrive released as an Xbox exclusive, developed by Insomniac Games. Bayonetta 2 was a Wii U exclusive developed by Platinum Games, but Nintendo financially supported the game development for it. And Astral Chain, which is a Nintendo Switch exclusive, also developed by Platinum Games and published by Nintendo. It's important to not conflate second-party exclusives with third-party because some second-party exclusives don't even come from game development deals. Heavy Rain was a PS3 exclusive because Microsoft refused to release the game because Microsoft was scared that the game was about kids being kidnapped. That was according to WindowsCentral.com. How about when Nintendo allowed Camelot Software Planning to develop the Mario Tennis and Golf series starting on the Nintendo 64? Both of those series are continuing to this day. In fact, Camelot are the ones who created the Waluigi character. And while we're on the subject of Nintendo, how about Rare and the Donkey Kong Country series? Diddy Kong was a creation of Rareware. Diddy was not conceived by Nintendo at all. Again, don't get second-party exclusivity confused with third-party, which, speaking of, let's get right into that. This is the area that most people have a problem with. what separates third-party exclusivity from second-party exclusivity is that Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo come in after the game is already developed and ready to ship, then just straight up buy exclusivity. There weren't pre-existing deals covering development costs like what happened with Bayonetta 2 or Astral Chain. It's just Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo sees something shiny and just has to buy it. Think about what Microsoft did during the 8th generation of gaming. They didn't try competing with Sony on hardware or first-party exclusives. Instead, they were more focused on making Rise of the Tomb Raider an Xbox exclusive because they threw a bunch of money at Square Enix / Crystal Dynamics to make it happen. Despite the fact that Tomb Raider 2013 released for the Xbox 360, Xbox One, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and PC, no, Microsoft wanted to make the sequel to Tomb Raider 2013 an exclusive to the Xbox One in order to quote-unquote compete. How did this fare for Microsoft? All this did was piss a lot of people off, and I don't know anyone personally who bought an Xbox One just to get Rise of the Tomb Raider. Some people were slamming Microsoft, not because Rise of the Tomb Raider was exclusive to the Xbox One, but that it was a timed exclusive. A lot of dum-dums were saying that Microsoft should have straight up bought exclusivity to bolster console sales. If we were to go over to the PC market, how did it work out when Metro Exodus was pulled from Steam and listed on the Epic Games Store? How did it work out when the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter promised Steam keys to backers, but then became an Epic Games Store exclusive before the game launched? Straight up buying exclusivity isn't competitive. The Epic Games Store wasn't challenging Steam on making a better platform. They were just buying exclusivity to games, so PC gamers had to buy the game from them, or people could just pirate Metro Exodus and Shenmue 3, which I do predict that probably happened, but I don't have direct numbers, data, and statistics to really show. But let's be honest, some people were probably pissed off enough to do it. And speaking of Microsoft and third-party exclusivity, Microsoft has been acquiring game developers like a bunch of hungry hippos over the last few years. Their two biggest acquisitions were ZeniMax, that's the holding company that owns Bethesda, and now more recently, Activision Blizzard. Microsoft has also launched a Netflix-like service called Game Pass. It's like Xbox Game Pass. I think it's that, I might be wrong, where for $14.99 a month, you can play games on your Xbox Series console, PC, and have access to Xbox Live Gold, or you can pay $9.99 a month to just play games on your Xbox Series X console. In fact, let's replay an earlier clip where RGT85 goes into Microsoft buying all of these game studios and Sony saying that they can't compete with Call of Duty.
You could make a case about Microsoft buying up all these studios, and that's sort of the crux of the conversation, because everyone is saying that if Microsoft starts doing these games, and even Sony themselves, a game like Call of Duty, we can't compete with Call of Duty if it were to go as a console exclusive game. You can't compete. I'm sorry, I thought the whole point of the video game industry was competition. I thought the whole point of the video game industry was to strive to do better. And if someone is doing something better than you, you try to find a way to circumvent that. You try to find a way to combat that, because competition makes for a better product. It makes for a better industry, a healthier industry, because now you have to come up with ideas. You have to think outside of the box. Not everything is just being handed to you from these third-party developers. It seems like the whole conversation doesn't really revolve around first-party exclusives, though, because that was something that a lot of people in the comments section of that video said, because I just basically said, you want to play a first-party Sony game, you buy a PlayStation. Maybe a couple years you can play it on PC, but you buy a PlayStation. You want to play a Gears of War or Halo, you buy an Xbox. You want to play Mario or Zelda, you buy a Nintendo product. But people said, no, it's not about that. It's about the third-party exclusives. Okay.
Yes, RGT, Sony could, in theory, make a game to compete with Call of Duty. But what is Sony facing? Call of Duty is still, as of the recording of this episode, one of, if not the biggest game in the first-person shooter genre. There's an economic principle that I cannot remember the name of right off the top of my head, but it goes something like this. Let's say there are two burger stands right across the street from each other. Burger stand A, let's call Billy Bob's Juicy Burgers. Billy Bob's Juicy Burgers has won some local awards and has some local recognition for making good burgers. Good like little mom and pop business. Burger stand B is McDonald's. Huge burger chain all over the world. Let's say you're driving down the road and you get hungry for a burger. Your options are Billy Bob's Juicy Burgers or McDonald's. You know what 9 out of 10 people would choose any day of the week if they were in a pinch? McDonald's. Because at least with McDonald's, you know what to expect. Billy Bob's Juicy Burgers might be good, but are you going to risk getting disappointed with the burger from Billy Bob's Juicy Burgers just to then go across the street and get a Big Mac, so you end up spending a lot more money than you originally intended? So yes, in theory, Sony can make a game to compete with Call of Duty. In fact, it may be better than Call of Duty. But Malibu Stacy got a new hat, and everyone buys that instead because it's Malibu Stacy. And I hope and pray to God that some of you got that reference. That's why Sony are saying that they can't compete if Call of Duty becomes an Xbox console exclusive. It isn't because they're scared of a little competition. It's because of that economic principle that I bring up with Billy Bob's Juicy Burgers or Malibu Stacy getting a new hat. What are Sony and Nintendo supposed to do to combat Microsoft? It was reported when the Activision Blizzard deal was initially going down that Microsoft has a market cap larger than Sony and Nintendo combined. What Microsoft are wanting to do is create a vertically integrated monopoly. They control the production and distribution of video games, leaving you, the gamer, no choice but to buy an Xbox Series X because of Game Pass's affordability. Then, in a few years, when Microsoft completely corners the gaming market, all of a sudden, Game Pass is now $120 a month. Then it jumps again to $150 a month. Then it jumps up again to $250 a month. You, RGT85, will cry, bitch, moan, cry, bitch, moan, cry, bitch, moan to Microsoft for days and days and days, weeks and weeks on end. And Microsoft, here's what Microsoft will just respond with. Yeah, RGT85, where else are you gonna go? We have the biggest games and more money than our competition. Meaning, we can effectively block them at retailers because we own so much of the market. We can threaten retailers to not carry Sony or Nintendo's products because we'll pull our support. They will lose too much money, so they will cave to our demands. Which leads me into my final talking point before concluding this response. Okay, now for those that don't know, United States v. Paramount was a Supreme Court case from 1948. In short, the movie industry had a vertically integrated monopoly at the time by owning the production companies making the movies and the theaters who showed them. They owned both production and distribution, essentially in a nutshell. United States v. Paramount, despite it being overturned very recently, told the movie industry you can either own the production companies or you can own the theaters. You can't own both. The idea was that because the major studios all own the theaters, they could block the independent movies from getting seen. With Microsoft stepping on a proverbial landmine with their announced acquisition of Activision Blizzard, I can foresee the same thing happening to the gaming industry. Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, you can either own the console manufacturing or the game development, but you can't own both. And this is the libertarian conundrum right here. A truly free market always starts out hyper-competitive. Think about the early days of the gaming industry. You had Atari, Intellivision, Coleco, Nintendo, Panasonic with the 3DO, Sega was in the console race, SNK with the Neo Geo. But now what are we left with? We're left with the Sony PlayStation, the Microsoft Xbox, and whatever the fuck Nintendo puts out. That's pretty much all we're left with, and here it is. This is the libertarian conundrum. A truly free market always starts out hyper-competitive, but always leans towards monopolization. However, a government-ran market is too inefficient. I'm personally not campaigning for this, but because Microsoft was being Microsoft and couldn't help themselves, the government could get involved and reevaluate the gaming industry like it did for the early movie industry. So if this does happen, thanks Microsoft for potentially fucking everything up.
It's the final countdown.
I said this in the beginning. First and second party exclusivity can be a necessary evil to sell consoles, but the other side of that argument is Sega. If first party exclusives were so important, then how come Sega isn't making consoles anymore? The type of exclusivity that needs to be stopped is third party exclusivity. That's the one where the game is already done and ready to ship, but Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo swoop in and buy exclusivity at the 11th hour, like what happened with Rise of the Tomb Raider. Personally, I'm not against console exclusives, but the industry needs to be careful about how it goes about acquiring exclusivity. If they aren't, then all that is going to happen is the consumer is going to say enough is enough and just pirate their shit. In fact, in my piracy always needs to be an option video right here on this very channel. It's not even a month old. My first main argument was too many services, too many exclusives. And I actually said this verbatim. The one thing that all of these streaming services have done is make original programming to stand out from the crowd. And it makes sense. TV has done that for decades. A show that you can watch on CBS is not one you can watch on NBC. But the difference between TV and streaming is you have to pay for each individual streaming services. With all of the exclusive content out there, you would be very hard pressed to find anyone who is not interested in at least one or two of these exclusive shows on the various platforms. Netflix has Stranger Things, House of Cards, and Extraction with Chris Hemsworth. Amazon Prime Video has the new Jack Reacher series just called Reacher, Jack Ryan, Bosch, The Boys, and Invincible. Hulu has The Handmaid's Tale, Hit Monkey, and MODOK. Disney Plus has all the Star Wars shows like The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett, along with all the MCU shows like WandaVision and Loki. HBO Max has Game of Thrones, Westworld, and Succession. YouTube had Cobra Kai before that went to Netflix in 2020. All of the new Star Trek shows like Star Trek Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, Strange New Worlds, and Prodigy are all on Paramount Plus. Apple TV Plus has Ted Lasso and The Morning Show. Peacock, Tubi TV, Discovery Plus, etc. all also have exclusive shows. It leaves this conundrum of who is going to pay for all of these services for just one or two shows. At best, people are going to sign up for one of these services for 1 month, watch all the exclusive content, and then cancel. But in reality, most people are just going to pay for the service that they use the most and pirate the rest. Streaming services have now become just as, if not more expensive than a cable package. To expect everyone who is interested in one or two shows on 5 different platforms to have 5 different accounts with 5 different passwords paying 5 separate fees is, in my opinion, the definition of lunacy. The same thing could happen in gaming. No one is going to buy all 3 major consoles. What they could do is buy the one console that they will use and pirate the other console's exclusives later, especially with how easy it was to create a Nintendo Switch emulator. Oops, I don't think I was supposed to reveal that because of all the what's the word I'm looking for? All the fucking elitists in the YouTube gaming space. And that's where I'm going to end this, folks. I'm not advocating for piracy, but if the industry isn't careful, it could create the incentives for people to pirate their shit.